Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and you know what, I decided to go ahead and do a second current events because I think this could be really informative. I haven't started squatting yet for the day. I'm holding off and being lazy. It's like 8:30 in the morning. But I had a subscriber ask me, hey Jason, I'm surprised you haven't made a video yet about the Boogs, Eric Bugenhagen, being kind of hurt, beat up, banged up a little bit, and still doing daily training. Don't you think his high frequency training or training every day is dangerous? Of course, I do the same thing. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing. We're going to skill up my crafting a little bit and let's talk about this. No, I don't think the training frequency is the problem. I think there's some specific aspects to Eric's training that I think contribute to injuries. And before I get into that, before anyone jumps in and says, Jason, why are you hating on the Boogs? I'm not. I actually like him. I have endorsed his channel in the past, and I've said that I think, based upon what I heard, I told you guys a few months back, it might have even been last year, that when I listened to his 5-part Q&A, he had like a 5-part long Q&A that he did over a year ago. I listened to the whole thing, and what I said was that about 90% of it was real legit. About 10% of it I didn't necessarily agree with, but about 90% of what he said in that longest bit of informative content that he had done up to that point was on point. Listening to him, as someone myself with years in the iron game, around all this a long time, I feel like at least 90% of what he said was on point. There were some pearls of wisdom in there. I like his channel, and the reason I like his channel, I feel like the guy has a real good balance of strength and conditioning knowledge with practical experience, and he's very passionate about lifting and training. All right, that's a good combination. Like all in all, that means I basically like what the guy's doing. For the most part, there's no one out there hardly that we're ever going to agree with 100%. Even if you guys like me, I'm not right all the time. There's sometimes things that people could have that are legitimate criticisms of it. Now, it doesn't mean I necessarily want to hear it always in my comments. But the fact is, there's truth to that. You know, we all have our own biases. We all make mistakes. You know, nobody gets everything right. Nobody. We're all human. But all in all, I like his channel. I more or less think he's got good stuff to say. And like I said, it's my opinion, just my personal opinion. He's about 90% good, about 10% maybe, you know, there's some, and not so much. But, you know, that's actually pretty good. If you're at 90%, dead on and 10% questionable, that's a real strong place to be in this community, considering a lot of guys out there, the average fitness YouTuber is about 50% wrong. So that's a real good spot to be in. So we get to the point of the injuries. No, I don't think ultra high frequency training is particularly dangerous. There are plenty of coaches out there who coach athletes in this style year round, and they actually have very, very low injury rates in their athletes. No, I think done correctly, it's actually a very safe way to train because it forces you to focus on specific movements repeatedly, pick exercises that you can do at a high frequency, master technique, and when you're doing this style of training, you tend to select exercises that have minimal shear stress, low inflammation on tendons, everything else. So if your exercise selection's on point, you're keeping the frequency high enough that you have a recovery situation in your connective tissue versus the muscle tissue that is pretty close to each other. In other words, you're not training it's messing with the frequency to the point to where the muscles are recovering faster than the connective tissue, in which case that can cause injuries. Guys who do this stuff, hit maxes every other day and then take a day off, those guys get hurt. Those guys get hurt at a higher rate than the daily training, believe it or not. John Bros noted that over the years because he's a coach who works with this method. So that's not really the issue. Let's discuss what it is. It's two things going on. Sometimes it's exercise selection and excessive psyching up for training. And I want to get into both of those. Now we'll cover the latter one first. All right, the psyching up. What do all the experts and people with advanced degrees who study ultra high frequency training tell you? There's emerging data showing that overtraining from this style of training is largely psychological. That high levels of psychological arousal, psyching yourself up, pre-workouts, jamming to the hard music, can push you into an overtrained state faster even when lifting the exact same amount of weight for the same number of reps through the week on ultra high frequency training. There's an argument to be made for calm training, particularly if you're going to lift heavy 5, 6, 7 days a week. And again, this has been noted by the experts who work in this style of training. This has been very noted. And when you start pushing towards that fatigue that comes, the accumulated fatigue from the overreaching from it, you start approaching overtraining. What happens? Form degradation happens, injury rates become higher. It can be a factor. I appreciate the guy's energy, I respect his energy, I like his energy. But when you're going to train in this style of training, you better factor that in, that excessive psyching up, and I get that he loves it, can be a problem. Now, Jamie Lewis, on the other extreme, would disagree now, wouldn't he? He trains heavy like 6 days a week. Again, extremely strong athlete in terms of like Wilks score, pound for pound strength, however you want to judge relative strength. By the way, no one does pound for pound. Please don't use that in strength sports. It makes you sound ignorant. But relative strength, Jamie Lewis is a damn beast, right? He does this similar ideas of training, but he does psych himself up and listens to metal and everything, but he's the exception, not the rule, right? The majority have noted to coaches who work with this that it's not a good idea. That's the minor point. Let's come to the big lifts. The non-conventional lifts. All right, I'm going to be honest here. A lot of these non-conventional lifts have the potential to put more shear stress on things like your knees, to damage your back, things like that. There's a reason conventional lifts are conventional in strength and conditioning. Guys can talk about non-conventional lifts all they want. You can love them and do them all you want, but you need to understand that some of these lifts carry higher injury rates. And two of them that the Bugs does absolutely can cause higher injury rates in the knees. First one's going to be the behind the back deadlift. I don't care. You guys try to call it silly stuff, Jefferson deadlifts. Why do you need to come up with these silly names, guys? It's a behind the back deadlift. Call it what it is. All right, what's going on here? Two issues. Number one, lets you lift more weight. Lets you lift more weight due to better mechanical leverages. Now, that's not necessarily always a bad thing, but when it's adding 200 pounds to a lift, you need to step back. When you're doing a variation of a primary exercise that lets you lift 200 pounds more than on your normal variations, you better look closely at what's going on and make sure there's no problem, because there's not always a guarantee that that's a higher injury rate. Start looking at things like knee slide. And why is it that we say half squats and quarter squats destroy your knees? Due to the knee slide and the shearing stress being put on the knee by using a heavier weight than you could actually lift through a full range of motion. And because at this angle right here, 45 degrees, when the femur is 45 degrees from the knee, that's where you have the most shear stress on the knee joint. When people half squat, like a lot of people who can only full squat 275 might half squat 400, you know, you guys know what I'm talking about? In order to do the half squat, you have to slow yourself down, and it causes excessive knee slide at the angle, right up here, at the angle where your knees have the most shear stress, and you're now using a weight that's heavier than your knee would ever be subjected to at that point in the range of motion, even if you were doing a max squat all the way down. All right, that damages your knees. Now, a lot of people say, well, why doesn't that happen on a deadlift? Because a deadlift, most people deadlift more than they squat, right? And oftentimes your knee is in near that angle, because you got to pull the bar in front of you. Because you are forced to pull the bar in front of you, you cannot have knee slide. You can't, because if you have knee slide, you can't get the bar past your knee. In other words, the biomechanical position involved with the hip hinge and having to get the bar past the knee, you can lift a lot more weight if you keep your knees back and you don't allow knee slide to happen. In fact, you need to keep your knee, the knee doesn't even come anywhere near the toe at that point up there, at that point. We don't worry about it so much at the bottom. It's when you're up here like this, because you got to get the bar around your knee. The behind the back squat allows you to squat a little more and jut the knees a lot further forward at the point where you have the most shear stress on the knee. Now, if you're a 600-pound deadlifter, a lot of guys who are 600-pound deadlifters who mess around with these behind the back deadlifts do like 800 pounds on them, sometimes more, right? Not strong enough. Perfect example. 600-pound deadlifter can do an 800-pound behind the back. It's textbook. Knee slide. It's going to allow for a higher chance of knee injury. Now, we can argue, though, there's less shear stress on the back. Yeah, that's true. But, you know, do people really get hurt from shear stress on the back with heavy deadlifts who use proper technique? Not so much. It doesn't happen that often, believe it or not. As long as you know how to train. It's doing stuff like touch and go reps. It hurts your back usually. It's not as big of a risk. So you're not really doing anything there because, yes, you have less shear stress on the back, but you also have more compressive stress because you have an extra 200 pounds on it. That's kind of a neutral. I don't think it's better or worse for your back, all things considered. However, that knee slide's a problem. You're going to have a higher chance of a knee injury doing this. Then you start thinking about the what? The rack pulls, above the knee rack pulls. Same thing. When people do above the knee rack pulls, or is anyone doing it as a hip hinge? No, they all squat the weight. Every single person who does these above the knee rack pulls with 800, 900, 1,000 pounds, all of them squat the weight. Dr. Mike talked about it. You're not doing it as a hip hinge. Well, the same thing. If you've got 900 or 1,000 pounds on the bar and you're a 500-pound squatter and you drop into a high partial squat to break it off the floor, and because the bar is already above the knee, there is the tendency to hitch and have even that knee slide. You're having that knee slide with a 900 or 1,000 pounds on your knees. And then you're standing up and locking 1,000 pounds on the knees when you haven't built the ability to lift that weight through any sort of real range of motion. So then you have shear stress on the knee because people are squatting it up. They're not doing a hip hinge. Combined with loading their knees with 1,000 pounds when you have people who might be a 500-pound squatter, 600-pound deadlifter, right? Or the Boogs, he's probably a 550 squatter, I think. I could be wrong. We know he's pulled 600 in comp. We don't know what he pulls now. But then 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 pounds loaded on your knees up at a lockout. Then you've got that compressive stress on the knee. That's more than that person's knee is probably built up over the years to handle. They don't have the support structure because they've never moved really, really heavy weights like that through a full range of motion. It's a lot of stress on the knees. So when people start doing these non-conventional exercises, and then, of course, you've got issues of the ligaments and the shoulders and everything. That's a whole nother risk with them. A lot of these non-conventional lifts with this ultra-heavy weight carry a degree of injury risk. And the two I just gave could hurt your knees. And, you know, he's got some knee problems. So when you look at all that and then you combine lifts like that with the ultra high frequency training, let's say you go do these dangerous non-conventional exercises 7 days a week, that could lead to some long-term problems. All right, guys, it's not the frequency that's the issue here. It's the exercise selection. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.